Thank you so much, Kevin. That was a perfect introduction to our own discussion of this universal apostolic preference. You've given us so much material. I can't wait for the small group discussions to see what we're going to talk about in terms of how we can promote this. I think you've given us so much ammunition in ways that I've never thought of. So thank you so much, especially in terms of the aspects of the liturgy. I'm just delighted with this. So, but enough of me. We have time now for some general discussion, reactions, questions for Senior Irwin. Once again, I ask you, identify yourself, if only also for the benefit of those who are watching this live stream or will see the recordings. So please identify yourself and where you're from, and Mark will bring you the microphone.
Thank you, Father. That was really wonderful. My name is Adam Lalonde. I'm a Canadian Jesuit here. And I was just curious. I mean, you touched on this a little bit when you talked about language of relationship over objectification and use and all that. But I just wonder if there was anything specific in the liturgy and the translations or the formulations of the liturgy as they currently exist that you think might need rethinking or particularly problematic in terms of how they affect our, how they shape our way of engaging with creation or thinking about creation?
Well, thank you. One example, and then a bit of a spin-off of that. The late 1950s, the These office was revised, and many of us began using that as an alternate to the Roman Breviary of 4 volumes, pre-Vatican II. And I'll never forget that the introduction said, the purpose of the hours is so that the humans can offer praise of God. They can articulate the praise of God through the Psalms and give voice to the Psalms and give voice to creation. Well, no, they don't. Creation does that. So it's a question, I'm going to use creation to do this. No. Creation does it. Creation is it, and we simply reflect it and raise it up. I think that's as simple as I can put it. So, and then more generally, if you take the turn that I'm offering, then we can never, ever regard any other living being as a fellow brother and sister on our common home. Then practices about discipline, asceticism, distribution become second nature, because this common home is not ours. We share in this common home. Give an example. In a parish many years ago, there was a parish priest who wanted to have a collection once a month for human concerns, poverty issues, rent issues, people needing job assistance. And so he entitled the collection, "What's Mine is Yours." Well, that's Catholic social teaching, universal destination of goods, the relative right to private property, not the right to private property. That was very Catholic nuanced. And 2 decades later, a businessman came into the office and said, "What's mine is mine." Well, it just depends how you begin to look at it. And I believe that there's a profound asceticism in Laudato Si that ought to give us a new set of eyes in which we don't objectify, but revere, reverence, acknowledge. And if those become the phrases, then I think we immediately turn the corner of any possibility of the other out there, rather than we are we.
Kevin, it's good to be here with you. Thank you very much. I'm thinking of the procession of the gifts in liturgy at Mass. You have three things going on: a nervous family who doesn't like to be seen by others, walking up the aisle as quickly as they can. You have the collection going on, and a song that people would have our noses in the books. So there's not a moment for attending to the gifts, to attending and maybe you might say meditating or contemplating what is being, the gifts being brought forward, and a moment of that kind of connection you're talking about, of relationship, not use of. So I think it's at least that one part of the liturgy that I think we can look at to collection has to happen. Singing could happen, but there could be ways of approaching that. But how would you re-envision that processional moment?
Despite the fact that I kept it for 45 minutes, the talk has it somewhere, and I ignored it, so I can reprise part of it. But first of all, the action itself is a major statement of the entire baptismal priesthood's participation in the liturgy. If all we do is have host on the altar at the beginning, then once again we diminish the very intrinsic nature of what participation means, and it becomes Father's Mass. So it's a disgrace when we don't have a presentation of the gifts. Secondly, if and when we have it, I mean, I think it's, one of my friends speaks in architectural circles and art circles about scale. What about the scale of the vessels we use at the altar and the scale of the vessels we use to bring up the gifts? What does that say about involvement? And now the pandemic has done us in with two species, obviously, and I try to deal with that in the COVID book, but at the end of the day, we still bring up bread that's bread, and we bring up wine that's wine. It maybe in less quantities, but vessels and scale, and thinking about this when the Cardinal spoke yesterday. I was in Africa in 1988, 89, and I was so taken with those processions at the offertory and the way people would walk. And then that was reprised for me when I was in San Francisco some years ago, and it was a Mass and an African-American choir. Of course, it was amazing. An African-American choir, servers, and an Anglo celebrant. But anyhow, but walking up in this way that you just say to yourself, this is being taken very, very seriously.
I'm Jérôme Guingamp, French Jesuit. What I would like to say is that I think that liturgical prayer or texts can shape our minds and our hearts. I like that in the Eastern rites liturgy of the hours, if I remember at the morning prayer, the Psalm 104, 103 is mainly taken, I don't remember, but I think each day or something like this. So they start the day with the praise to the creation. And it could shape also a consciousness for praise service of the creation. Second, you spoke about Mass for diverse circumstances. Yesterday, John Baldwin told us, when it's green, we are free. It's true, there are some. I don't remember what place they had in the former Roman Missal before the Vatican II Council, but mainly they are linked with rural life. And what about for us now? Most of the people are living in cities and big cities. And I'm wondering why in the church and the dicastery of the divine worship, they produce two new diverse circumstances mass, one for the pandemic and one for evangelization, I think. But they didn't produce anything after Laudato Si. For the praise of nature, for the respect of nature, etc., we could find topics. And I think such texts of prayer during Mass could shape minds and hearts.
Thank you. First of all, one of my reactions to the last 20 years in liturgical life, certainly in America, has been the extraordinary burden that the act of translation has placed on all of us. Evaluation and kicking and screaming and politicization and all of that. So I feel like Eliza Doolittle, words, 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 I'm sick of words. So in respect on liturgy, the primalness of liturgy, and I think one of the critiques of liturgy is that it's not primal enough. And yet, I would respond to say that I would not be in favor of a Mass formula about creation, because creation is shot through the hours, the Psalms, it's shot through evening prayer, and the very engagement in creation is the act of worship. So, again, I don't want to put my finger at that and add something, but then I would raise up what's in the Missal already, and the prefaces about creation. There's probably two specifically, Eucharistic Prayer 4, and then those additional prayers at the end of the Missal. So I think it's already there, and the reaction is parallel to another critique of the Missal was some folks are saying there's no Mass in honor of God the Father. Well, last I checked, that's how we begin and end. It's kind of like the Wendy's commercial that's in there, but maybe not maximized and maybe not fully symbolized. I think that could be true. And then the question about the Psalms, it's extraordinary to me that we have such a rich repertoire of psalmody from which we can draw, and all of our liturgies, and numberless of them deal with creation, right, as you say. So I think that's all to the good.
Kevin, thank you. I really appreciate it. This is just a clarification of something you said that I would find helpful when you were talking about the cosmic context and the phases of the moon and the whole Easter season. And then you made a reference to that Advent and Christmas cycle does not emphasize this. Could you say, is that what you said?
Let me go back to that and rephrase that. I believe what I should have said, and thank you, is that I think that the Lent Easter season collects do not deal with light. What I did say? Well, I think that's correct.
And Christmas and...
I'm not going to say any more about that. That was 8 books ago. I can't do that.
Okay. The second, just a comment, is that this whole context is very important for students that I've encountered, especially from Africa. I just had someone do a thesis which was on Shona burial rites and the respect for creation and how it's integrated into the actual rite itself. So, anyway,
and to be fair, you gotta say what you know, what you don't know. I'm not from the Southern Hemisphere. I read about it. I have no expert. Mark Francis is an expert, so it's a work in progress, and maybe I'll know more about it in 2 years. But I just haven't done that, and I want to be very fair that those have done much, much more on that. I wanted to touch on it because of the phenomenon of the cosmos, but I can't, no possibility that I could articulate what that really means. That's not fair. Not fair to you, not fair to me. I mean, it's...
Thank you, Monsignor, for your wonderful presentation. I just wanted to make a comment about acknowledging creation. At Santa Clara a few years ago, I'm Dennis Smolarski from Santa Clara University in California. A few years ago, we had an inauguration of a new president, and the land that the mission rests on is Ohlone and Mwekwa Ohlone Indian land, Native American land. But they invited somebody from the tribe to come and do somewhat of a classical Indian blessing, Native American blessing for those who had gathered together. And I found it striking of the acknowledgement of creation that was incorporated in this. He asked everybody present to face the four directions of the compass, to look at the sky, to look at the ground. And he used the word not God, but grandfather. Oh, grandfather, we thank you for the west where the wind blows. We thank you for the east where the mountains are, north and south, the sky that brings us the rain, the ground from which our food comes forth. But it was something that I've never really experienced explicitly in our Christian liturgical tradition that focuses so explicitly and acknowledges all of creation that surrounds us day by day that we just overlook. But I just add this as a comment.
And I would point again to our conversation here yesterday after the talk. We were engaging the parts of the Eucharistic prayer, and classically that's where praise for creation is embedded. And then heaven and earth are full of your glory, Hosanna in the highest. So it's creation and redemption at the same time. So there are things there. Sometimes, again, we don't hear them. And one advantage, it seems to me, of being a preacher is that you read commentaries and pick up new ideas every time, and you pick up a commentary on the Eucharistic prayer, and one will say about that heaven and earth are full of your glory, about creation, and somebody else will talk about eschatology. And so, I mean, it's an amazing multivalent moment that it's almost too much. And the older I get, I want to slow down this whole thing, because there are so many things coming at you in terms of signs and symbols and gestures and impact upon you, and you can't take it all in, which is one of my points. You can't take it all in, and thank God liturgy comes back again and again and again, because otherwise, and again, calm down. Again, one of my critiques is that we've made liturgy much more of an educative function. Do I understand it? Well, in Magnum Principium, with all due respect, it does use the word understand, and this is not my favorite word, because the ritus et preces are the means to engage us in the most infallible thing we know, unfathomable. So, and whether we get all the understandings that day of Trinity Sunday, I mean, you want to leave with communion and 3 credits. But at the end, that's not the point. It's that we abide in these persons, and these persons abide in us. If you get nothing else, that's what Trinity Sunday is about. So I'm sick of words, although I play with them all the time. But it's the heart and soul is so much richer than we've been allowed to make it because of the preoccupation of correct, or say that, less inadequate translations, and because our emphasis has been on understanding what's going on. I don't think that that's necessarily the focus. We have baptisms in the parish, and every couple of months, and they're always at the Sunday Mass. And in the parish I helped out in years ago, the same pastor who did What's Mine Is Yours, he emphasized immersion baptisms. So people would come in and they would welcome the weekend and say, well, how many dunkers do we have, Father? And how many dunkers? But communal baptisms in that parish were usually 5 baptisms, sets of parents, godparents, siblings who wanted Cheerios and attention, and grandfathers with photographs and taking pictures. I wanted to immerse the camera because it was so distracting. But the point was, the next time, I'll hear that line that I didn't hear this time because the kid was pulling on his sister's hair. Okay, that's the reality. But sacramental signs, the repetition is what makes it work. So again, I think it's like putting your hand into a glove, and you experience it again and again and again, and then it becomes an experience of, well, yes, this is Advent, and we're going to do these. This is going to happen in a new way, and that kind of level of catechesis, I think, hasn't done very well, I think, among our folks. And they look for certain triggers, and very often the triggers of the old Mass are coming back to be triggers for the new Mass. Bells, consecration. At the end of the day, when you've got a Eucharistic prayer that's an act of theology.
Tony Lasvardi, an American Jesuit, and this idea that I agree with you that the closer we stay to the liturgy itself and the sensibilities of the concrete signs and symbols, the better off we are. And one of my preoccupations, kind of generally, and I wonder if you could give me your take on it, is when we start to talk about some of these things more theoretically and more abstractly, and start to talk about, the sacramentality of the world, for example, it easily shades into something like pantheism, panentheism, that, we lose what's, as you said, unique about the rites. And so how do we avoid doing that? I'm looking for your take on how do we avoid taking that step that a lot of people just naturally will fall into?
Well, I wouldn't mind a little bit of that heresy. I mean, I suffered so long from sacred secular, it's time to kind of merge and interpret. And I kind of avoid pantheism, panentheism, because I don't understand them, frankly. I mean, it's a philosophical way of categorizing these things. But words like relationship, belonging, responsibility, participation, those words help me in this. And and everywhere, well, Catholic theology makes distinctions, so we have an awful lot of appropriate distinctions about how and where. And so inanimate objects, what does that mean? So at the end of the day, I kind of back off and I do kind of a lot of nature stuff. And if we dabble a little bit on the other side, I think Francis and Benedict would be happy, as examples. And it doesn't alarm me as much as it might alarm other people.
John Bolderman, Boston College.
You go way back.
Just to my own request. Kevin, I really thank you again. The Ember Days fascinate me, and I like your comment about the U.S. bishops not having the imagination and creativity to deal with that. I'd mentioned before. First of all, let me say, quote Chauvet. Louis Marie Chauvet. Now we understand that we don't understand, which I think is a brilliant line. But anyway, that's an aside. The Ember Days. There's a dissertation that I'm reading from your own university now, a book by Jim Sabak, a Franciscan, on the vigils in the Roman Rite. And it's fascinating because the first chapter is on the Ember Days. And he emphasizes, he thinks that the Ember Days really shaped the vigils of the other vigils, Easter even, so it was fascinating. But one comment he makes is that how cosmic and eschatological they are. So that really goes along with your theme. But the question, that was a comment, the question is, do you have any ideas about how we might incarnate the Ember Days? As you said, the Constitution says we're not going to do the traditional ones, but we leave it to your imagination, if I can use that word, to recreate them. So, any ideas?
What I had was it would be a perfect way to do something about environment. Again, don't want to add another feast, but that could be something with regard to responsibility for the environment. I've not thought, but then there could be 4 times a year, there could be something about peace or something about migration, something like that would raise it up more than a World Day of Prayer for these things. And Sabak, I was the second reader on that dissertation, and Sabak was responsible for the quality of my weekends because it was so dense. I said, oh, darn, another chapter. But it's an excellent piece of work at Jim, and he's on to a number of good things by way of Dominic Serra. And he did learn a few cosmic things from me as we bumped along at Catholic, yeah.
I'll give it a good.
Thank you. Thanks.
May we have a question in French?
Well, then help me out.
Merci beaucoup de votre exposé, tout d'abord. Et après la question, deux questions en fait. La première, c'est, après le Vatican II, avec la réforme de la liturgie, on a des exigences par rapport à la participation et l'engagement du peuple dans la célébration. Et là, on dit qu'il doit être une participation active, consciente, etc. Et ça met un poids dans la liturgie énorme. Disons que c'est beaucoup plus de poids qu'on en avait auparavant. Auparavant, on n'exigeait pas ce type d'engagement des personnes qui sont là. Et finalement, tout doit être compris, tout doit être rationalisé. On a un certain rationalisme qui rentre par là dans nos célébrations. Ou c'est une manière de comprendre le Vatican II avec ces exigences de Sacrosancto Concilium. Ça, c'est la première des choses. Poser une question, c'est une problématique d'abord, mais c'est une question aussi. Et la deuxième question, c'est on ne met pas beaucoup de choses, on charge la liturgie, on cherche que la liturgie donne une réponse à tout dans notre vie. Et là, s'il y a un problème avec l'environnement, avec l'écologie, on cherche une réponse dans la liturgie. Alors, je pense que c'est beaucoup de poids et beaucoup de choses pour que la liturgie donne des réponses toujours, à tout le moment. Alors, c'est deux problématiques que je voudrais, moi, écouter votre réaction.
Let's have Charlie Potty. Oh, Adam, yeah.
So the first, very briefly, was about the Second Vatican Council's requirement about active participation in the liturgy, or encouragement of active participation in the liturgy, and the requirement of this engagement, and whether it employs now a little bit like too much of a rationalization of the liturgy, or rationalisme. I don't know if there'd be a better way of putting that in English, but just overthinking and like intellectualization, I guess, maybe in a way. And the second question was about briefly if we now ask that the liturgy become an answer for kind of everything that I guess kind of back to your point about the learning place of the liturgy.
Thank you. Merci. First thing is, Trillian, the flesh is the instrument of salvation. So bodyliness. And sometimes we're decapitated and our bodies don't seem to matter, but it's about bodies. And so robust processions do matter, it seems to me, and the movement of the assembly in the gestures together matter. I was invited to review a book that was proposed by a publisher here in Louvain, and it was entitled Dancing Theology. Well, once we got beyond the Trinity, I was stunned with the presumptions of this book, and it was all about the individual solo performances that can be added to Anglican worship that make it inviting. And I said, you know, hats off. I'm not going to go there. But bodiliness and primalness are essentials, and yet, you know, one time we do gather around the fire is the vigil, and it's stunning in terms of contrast to other liturgies. So body matters, it seems to me. And then some of us who have done higher studies especially can be tempted to instruct by instinct, and even in our homilies. And so evoking and reminding folks of things in preaching, I think, is an important way not to decapitate our brains and make us function on the brain level. And again, scale of gestures and as important as a scale of vessels in terms of being involved in a highly symbolic ritual.
Andrew Cameron Mowat, St. Ignatius Parish, Stamford Hill in London. Thank you very much, Kevin, for your wonderful talk. One of the key features I find in my parish is the desire of the people to return to the church as quickly as possible. And in that sense, they want to be back together in their Christian community that they've supported through COVID and everything else. And they have a real taste for the being together, for singing, for praying together in the silence. And they're not interested in this invention of sacred means some weird transcendence of not understanding and not appreciating and, in a way, not participating. They don't want Mass in Latin. They don't want the priest facing the wall. They don't want a barrier of ironworks between the priest stuck on the altar. They want involvement and engagement. And for them, that is sacredness. So there's a real sacredness, I think, also in their family life, in how they've coped with the poverty situation in our country, on sharing food as well with the homeless. And that's a real engagement. And in a sense, they're responding very much to the need. And they find in that response a real participation in God, which they take very seriously, and they rejoice in that every day.
Well, I certainly find that in the parish where I help out in. I think that at the end of the day, those relationships are the kinds of things that the Pope is basically saying about the structure of the church now. If we're evangelizing orders and trying to welcome in and share the good news, it's a far cry from the Chantry office asking in October how many folks came to Mass on Sunday. I mean, it's going to be a different criterion. You know, I mean, how big was the collection? Well, wait a second. I mean, what kind of grace was unleashed in a difficult encounter with a divorced couple? You know, it's looking at it from a very different point of view. And I do think that this new constitution about the Curia is a gangbusters because it breaks the mold on lots and lots of things. I mean, the way I read part of it was that, and what they did in Doctrine of the Faith, they appointed 2 undersecretaries, I believe, and they were both priests, but neither was made a titular archbishop. So that caused some weeping and wailing among Vatican officials looking for their next Magenta because that's not going to happen. So, I mean, that kind of thing says to me that this Pope is looking at the real deal. And that's where 2 or 3 are gathered and they wash feet and they break bread and they take care of each other and they drive each other to church. And that's the real church. I mean, and I have some strong feelings about live stream masses because, you know, on Sunday you sit down and you get your cup of coffee and then you can pause it and come back and get a second cup of coffee and there's no collection, and you go home. I mean, or you stay home in your jammies. I mean, it's just not the kind of thing that people yearned for. And now that COVID is somewhat stable in our country, they've come back in good numbers to want to be there.
Parishes have found a way to take a collection with live streamed masses. That's one of the reasons why they continue.
Well, there you are. So much for the bodies, hands taking up the collection. Yes.
Monsignor, thank you very much. Philip Ganir from Catholic University in DC. I grew up in a very beautiful place. I grew up in Honolulu, where we had a lot of beach masses, and the bishop had forbidden that for all sorts of complex reasons. For that, it's not something that is really done anymore. But given your study, of Laudato Si, and nature and the environment, has your study of Laudato Si inspired inspired, further thoughts and reflections of what it means to worship in nature or with a greater integration of nature, in our worship spaces?
Not really, I have to say, I'll be honest. It hasn't, and it may well be that I didn't grow up in Honolulu, and I didn't have the beaches or the surf or that, but it is a function, I think, of Lonergan says, be attentive. Be attentive not only in the worship, in the act of worship, but be attentive in the day in, day out sacramentality of life. And being attentive to that, to me, is a rich, unmined source for sacramentality and environment and creation. It's all of a piece. So, I mean, many years ago in the U.S., priest of the St. Louis Diocese, Hillregel, composed this song, "God's blessings send us forth." And that was kind of getting the connection between the liturgy and life. But I want to write a song, if you can imagine. I'm not big at hymns, and it's another story. But God's blessings gather us in. That's the key. If you get the first part right, God's blessings gather us in, and we engage in worship, and then our God's blessings send us forth. I think that's the continuum. And for me, that's been lost. And that's what I think is one of the contributions of Laudato Si in terms of a theology of worship. So it becomes a continuum. So it's kind of like the dean's emails. Very few on Monday and Tuesday morning. Then they shoot up and go across until Thursday and then go down. Gathering, word, altar, and go forth. That's the continuum. And to me, that makes a whole lot of difference in terms of then sacramentality is forcing nothing, it's discovering everything in the act of liturgy and in living living in the world.
Thank you, Kevin, for your presentation. This is just a question, I guess, for you and maybe for us. I have found that reading nowadays with this whole care of the earth, women are writing and composing texts that I find are very imaginative, more imaginative than some of our Roman prayers.
Ours are boring.
Sorry?
Ours are boring. I mean, that's the nature of our prayers are boring.
Thank you. You have said it. But I'm just wondering whether, is that, we talked about imagination yesterday in the liturgy, the need for that. Is it valid to say that women have more imagination in terms of the creation and the care of the earth and expressing that in prayer?
I'm not going to touch that.
You're not going to touch that. I don't know.
But not stupid. I'm not going to touch that one. Thank you.
I just find that there is a lot of imagination.
And I would certainly. You said it.
Okay. Thank you.
I think that's an excellent way to bring this session to a close. Once again, please join me in thanking Monsignor Kevin Irwin for such a splendid presentation.